Hello and welcome everybody to the 17th episode of TechLifeSkills with Tanmay. I hope you're all doing well, hope you're all staying safe. My name is Tanmay Bakshi and thank you for joining today's episode. Now today we have a very special discussion, and that's because not only are we going to cover a wide array of fascinating topics, but we also have the rare and unique opportunity to talk to somebody with a perspective that I believe almost nobody else in the industry really can provide us with. We are going to cover a few key topics today throughout our discussion. First of all, we're going to be seeing how next generation technologies intersect with business in ways that you might not have thought of. And plus, we're also going to talk about the responsibility that companies have to give back to their communities and bring more people into the world of technology. So as you can tell, we have got so much to talk about today, and that's why I don't want to take up much more of your time before I go ahead and introduce today's very special guest, the CEO and Chief Diversity Officer at Nielsen himself, David Kenny. Now, David brings an enormous wealth of experience to the show today, and to spend some time with him live is really the opportunity of a lifetime. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and welcome David to the show. Hi, David. How are you doing?
I'm very well, Tanmay, and it's a privilege to be with you today.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Thank you. It's an honor to have you on. So to start today, I want to dive a little bit more into the work that you and Nielsen do. So could you please tell us a bit more about maybe the work and the offerings that Nielsen provides, and where and what kinds of technologies that those offerings touch?
Yeah, so Nielsen has two businesses. One business is for media, and a lot of people know the Nielsen ratings,
Mhm.
which are a part of it. But basically, we're measuring everything that the audience is listening to, watching, or engaging with on every screen, the
Wow.
phone, the tablet, the TV,
Mhm.
and what they're listening to as well. And I think that helps the owners of those media companies know what to provide people, what they're interested in,
Mhm.
and it helps the advertisers know how many people saw it, how often they saw it, and what the outcomes were. So that's one business. The other business measures everything that people buy in supermarkets and drugstores, which is equally important. All of that is being changed by technology. Artificial intelligence has really helped us. Image recognition
Mhm.
helps us understand what those products are on the shelf. Um, Sound recognition helps us understand through an audio mark what people are listening to, what they're engaging with. And predictive models help us know what people are discovering and what they're likely to watch next. So, in so many ways, the media experience and the cultural experience of literally billions of people around the world is being driven and measured using machine learning models.
Wow, that is so incredible. I mean, as you know, I'm passionate about the world of machine learning. So seeing how, billions of people, the choices that they make in their days about the media that they consume, is to see that that's being driven by machine learning is pretty incredible. I mean, yeah, you mentioned we've got all this sort of new technology up until a couple years ago. Within, like, for example, recommendation, the state of the art was collaborative filtering, and now we're starting to see more companies like Spotify and Apple actually start to use neural networks to understand the content, the sound within music, for example, try and figure out what it is that people are listening to. So it's really incredible stuff, and we're definitely going to get deeper into that today. But first, I want to start off with something a little bit more fundamental. So you've been working with technology for a really long time, so for a couple of decades now, and you've been looking at technology from that sort of from a higher level, and seeing sort of not only how technology is being applied, but even how businesses are being structured around that technology to be able to make full use of it. One of the examples that I like to give is that with AI, you can't have silos within your organization, right? You've got to have everybody collaborating in order to figure out where those intersections are, where we have data and we can extract value and we can use AI. And so could you please maybe walk us through some of those major milestones that you've seen in your career where there's like a new technology or maybe a paradigm shift that has not only forced us to say, all right, now there's this brand new technology that we can use, but also we have to restructure the way we do our business so that we can fully make use of this technology in order to deliver new experiences to the people that we provide our offerings to?
Yeah, well, now you're just aging me. But the truth is, part of why I've enjoyed knowing you these last few years has been that I got interested. It wasn't called computer science when I was in high school. It was just computer programming, data processing, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So I started out doing COBOL programming on punch cards. So a long time ago. But I would say, for anyone at your age, sort of starting their career, we're going to go through 3 or 4 or maybe 5 cycles in the course of your career. Just judging from my own experience, where there've at least been 3 major cycles. So the first cycle when I started was just the ability of computers to process data. And so many things that we were calculating by hand, you could calculate in data. That allowed a lot more data-driven decisions, a lot more research decisions. I applied a lot of it at the time into the car business that I started out at GM.
Mm-hmm.
And, Moore's Law kind of drove that period, because literally every year, you could double the amount of computing you could do on a chip.
Mm-hmm.
And that created real exponential growth in the power processing. And so all companies, including Nielsen, built big data centers, started with mainframes. Then, of course, it moved to the PC and it moved to the phone. It just got smaller and easier and more accessible
Mm-hmm.
because of more and more computing power. And that continues today. But I think the first thing was to plan for the computing power of the next exponential level of growth, and know how much more you could compute. It was pure weight, if you will, of computing. Then we went to this second phase, as more and more devices could compute, and that was how they could network together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think their Metcalfe's law took over, and the value of a network is equal to the square of all the nodes on the network. And what became important were big networks. And of course, Amazon built a huge network
Mm-hmm.
in commerce and then turned that into Amazon Web Services. Azure followed with its network in B2B. Other folks like IBM and Oracle followed along, and of course, Google as well. And that whole layer of cloud computing connecting to sort of an endless network of endpoints changed a lot of things. And it became much more about the network effect than just computing power. And even in Nielsen's business, as content is distributed, so much more of it can be streamed when it's on those platforms.
Mm-hmm.
They move much faster, but you had to redesign everything to be able to work in the cloud. And that's a process that our company has gone through and continues to go through, and all of our end customers are going through as well. And I think that drove us right up till 4 or 5 years ago. And then of course we moved to machine learning and artificial intelligence and some of the stuff we started with. And that is when it because it's now cheaper, because data lives in data lakes, it's more accessible. You can begin to recognize patterns. You can then begin to do convolutional neural nets. You can begin to draw inferences. And I think we're in the middle, I think, of this sort of machine learning phase.
Mm-hmm.
And then I believe there'll be a phase after this. My suspicion is it's going to be around IoT. It's going to be around devices getting smarter. A lot of what I'm focused on next at Nielsen is that TVs are not going to be just dumb receivers of content. They're actually going to be computers.
Mm-hmm.
Our cars are going to be computers. We're going to wear computers. And so I think, as everything gets smarter at the edge, we'll go back to something around IoT. I don't know what the law is that's going to drive that growth, the way we had Moore's Law and Metcalfe's Law, but I'm certainly trying to figure it out right now.
Very interesting. I mean, thank you for sort of walking us through those cycles. And you're absolutely right. There are going to be tons of different cycles. We're in the middle of this sort of machine learning phase where all sorts of companies are like, oh, wow, we can do this now with tech. How can we really make use of this? I really liked what you said around TVs, for example. They're not just going to be dumb receivers of content that show what others have already built. They're going to be computers. They're going to be running compute at the edge. I feel like we've already seen a lot of examples of this. I actually just Googled it, and the Apple TV, at least the 4K one, it has an entire A10X fusion chip on it, which is the chip that went in iPads a couple of years ago, right? So Apple and other companies are already starting to put literal swaths of compute power on your TVs. To think that your TV is orders of magnitude more powerful than, the ships that sent humans to the moon, right, is incredible. So they're not just sitting there receiving content, right? They're doing compute, and being able to leverage that compute power is what's going to set,
Right.
certain companies apart. And really quickly before we move on, I want to talk a little bit about aversion to change, right? People are traditionally afraid of change. I believe there was I'm forgetting his name unfortunately, but he was a really famous financial analyst, I believe. And when the internet was starting to get popular, he was like, the internet's not going to do anything for retail. It's not going to change anything. And look at where we are now. or
Right.
when or when Apple released the iPhone, all sorts of companies, including Microsoft, were like, what's that going to do? It doesn't even have a keyboard on it. And again, look at where we are now. So have you noticed that throughout all of these cycles, does it always start off with that aversion to change, and people are like, oh, this isn't going to do anything, and it ends up disrupting the industry? What would you say?
So some of it's generational. So first of all, I would say change is happening faster. So the other thing about the cycles I described is, the big compute era might have been 2 decades, the network era might have been, 1 decade, the AI era might be 5 years, IoT might be 2 years. So everything's moving at a faster pace as technology advances because it builds on all the technology that came before. So
Yes.
we're speeding up, and that means people have to be adept at faster change than ever before. One, I'd say, secondly, to me, part of the change management relates to diversity and inclusion because what's important is that we're really listening to everyone and changing at a faster pace. Some of the reason that the people most averse to change are the people who got power or wealth or market value in one way, believe that change can disrupt them, and it can, and it will
Mm-hmm.
anyway,
Mm-hmm.
but they want to kind of protect the way it was versus lean into the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
um, and culturally, as I came into a new company a year ago, part of where I focused on inclusion was honestly some younger people like yourself who are more recently out of college are closer to new technologies than some folks who've been around a long time, so there can be reverse mentoring.
Mm-hmm.
I think, secondly, folks who come from different backgrounds, different kinds of schools, different races, gender diversity, that all actually helps make change go faster because by definition, you're learning from more folks. So I think breaking down power structures is the key to making change. As much as I hate the worldwide pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
and I really think some of the racial strife in the world's been, it's been there forever, but it's been really visible.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those have been tough, but honestly, for me, they've created a better environment for change. Because when we're all working on Zoom or Google Hangout, every tile is equal. It doesn't matter what your level is. It doesn't matter what your race is. Everybody speaks equally.
Mm-hmm.
A lot more decisions have to be pushed to the edge. People on the front line are making more decisions without levels and levels of review,
Mm-hmm.
and that's actually speeding things up. So, listen, this was forced on us by a really terrible disease,
Mm-hmm.
but I think the world's going to change more in 2020 than it has in the last 5 or 6 years.
Very nice. I love that message. The world's going to change more in 2020 than it has in the past like 5 or 6 years. And I completely agree with you in the sense that COVID has kind of forced us to change, right? And we sort of started this theme on the Tech Life Skills show, and seeing how it's forced us to change with our education episode, where we were like, we have completely, within the matter of days, disrupted the way that we educate. Up until a little while ago, if we were to say, all education is going to happen virtually, people would think, wait, what? No, that's not possible. And all of a sudden, a couple days later, oh, pandemic hits, now everything's virtual. And it takes some time to adapt, and there's definitely debates going on about this, but overall, it's something that's forcing us to change. It's something that's forcing us to adapt and innovate so that we can continue to be relevant and safe. And so you're right. It's going to be really interesting to see how it enables us to sort of adapt to change more. Now, you mentioned diversity is really a catalyst for change, and I want to get into that as well in just a moment. But first, I want to sort of circle back to machine learning and AI that we were talking about. You mentioned that,
Okay.
lots of different Nielsen offerings are powered by the world of AI and machine learning. We've talked about recommendation, which is like sort of that first thing that comes to your mind when you think of, hey, what's AI doing in media? Could you maybe give us a little bit more of an idea of exactly where AI and machine learning technology are empowering the offerings that Nielsen provides?
Yeah, well, let me start with why I came to Nielsen, and the
Sure.
one role of Nielsen is making sure that there is a ground truth,
Mm-hmm.
because AI models can really go off track. And we've seen this if they don't have adequate volume of good, reliable, verified data. And so, the fact that at the root of our data are panels where we actually physically know families, we see them, we see everyone that's there. We're not trying to draw an inference from an email address or a phone ID, but you've got to start with some level of ground truth. And I think when we've looked at the limitations of AI in healthcare or in education or even in media, um, it was often because there wasn't a good enough ground truth. So the models weren't being trained with a robust enough fact base.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm really committed to making sure that we provide the ground truth to the media industry, and that the other business provides the ground truth to the consumer retail business and consumer packaged goods business. Because without ground truth, models go awry, and we've seen it over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And we have this unique role in two really important industries that affect virtually everybody on earth to make sure the ground truth is there. Then I would say that ground truth is being used, um, fundamentally to automate the sort of more manual aspects of what we used to do. So, one is, we used to go into supermarkets and see everything that was on the shelf and, record that. We can now do that with cameras and image recognition. We don't have to travel to all those places.
Mm-hmm.
On the media side, we can do amazing things to actually understand exactly what show, episode, artist everyone's watching. So that that helps discover things that they might like in the future. That also helps verify what people watched and when they watched it. So if it's ad sponsored, that the advertiser knows with a by fact that they reach this many people this often for that length of time.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that sort of voice and sound recognition has been really useful as well. We're increasingly using AI in the way we do things. So the way we schedule our time, the way we direct people to the next task, the way we send people out to do field research, all of that AI models make it way more efficient to kind of be a virtual assistant to every one of our, 40,000 people around the world, to make sure that, their days are as effective as possible because we've operationalized it. And then there's a lot of, before you can get to AI, there's just a lot of robotic process automation that's helping the way we bring the data in as well. So, we have terabytes and terabytes of data that we need every day to measure the things we do. And AI has just allowed that to all become more accessible and more efficient.
I've got to say that as somebody that works with the world of AI and machine learning so much and has to like go through swaths of data to figure out, patterns and where AI can be effective, I have to say thank you because, without that ground truth and without, the kinds of data that Nielsen provides, it is really, really difficult to actually build AI models. So yeah, that's really important. And actually, you mentioned something really interesting. That AI can help you by, in a way, being a kind of virtual assistant, right? Enabling, operationalization of things that essentially make your workflows more effective or more efficient, really. And this brings me to the sort of conception or misconception, really, that a lot of people have of the virtual assistant eventually taking over the role of the person that it's trying to assist. A lot of people think of artificial intelligence as actual intelligence. And so I want to get your thoughts on artificial intelligence, where it falls on that spectrum of augmenting versus replacing jobs, specifically within the work that Nielsen does, maybe, and what are your thoughts on where AI is going to be applied in the future?
Yeah. Well, there's so many places. And as I said about the pace of change, it's being used in new ways every
Mm-hmm.
day.
Mm-hmm.
So you started by sort of thanking me for the ground truth. If you're in the media industry, literally, 70 to 100 billion dollars trades on that truth, because actually the buyers of advertising and the sellers of advertising have to agree
Mm-hmm.
how many people saw it, and the buyers of content and the sellers of content have to agree what did they watch. Our ability to match that, actually, it becomes currency. They actually write their contracts based on that data. And I use that as an example because I think in more and more fields there's going to be um, a ground truth that allows people to trust each other. And without that trust,
Mm-hmm.
you can't scale up. But where you can get that trust, and I think, while we're the currency here, I think there'll be currency for medical records. I think there will be currency for e-commerce. So as other industries get to a ground truth that can feed their models, they can then trust them more.
Mm-hmm.
That means you're going to move beyond sort of what we do today, which is mostly automate rote tasks, to sort of higher levels of helping to transact, helping to understand the value of something you're buying or something you're selling. So I do think it's going to move up into higher orders of analysis, negotiation, and contracts, which will help commerce move faster. So and a lot of that today is done by humans, but it is changing and becoming more automated. I think that certainly replaces some things that people do today, but it creates opportunity for new things. So I think the more people are learning, they can, and that's why I love what you're doing with these seminars, getting people on a lifelong journey of learning. The more they can learn, I think the more people can then say, okay, well, how do I use that data to know what content to produce next, what show to make next, what ad to make next? Um, how do I use that data to know what product to produce next? How do I know what people need that they're not getting today? So I think it's going to continue to be a collaboration where the machines open up new opportunities and humans pick up those opportunities and develop them. But I would say it's back to change. It's going to put a higher order on making sure people have in their day, sometime 10, 20, 30% of their day forever has to be learning. There's no way to keep up with this without humans learning at the rate the machines are learning.
Absolutely. You are completely correct in the sense that, if we have so much change, we have to make sure that the people actually dealing with this technology are able to keep up with that so that they're leveraging it to its fullest extent. Otherwise, there's no value to that technology, right? It's about,
Yep.
at the end of the day, it's about the humans leveraging it. And as you mentioned, while AI and while machine learning is going to continue to get into higher and higher orders, we still will, not only will we be augmented by that technology, but we're also going to have brand new opportunities opened up by it. So I absolutely love your thoughts on that. Thank you very much for sharing. And now let's go a little bit deeper into how we can communicate better with artificial intelligence. So a little while ago, I had a keynote in just outside of Dubai in Sharjah at a conference called the International Government Communication Forum. And one of the key messages that I had in that keynote was that as a government, and we can have a similar analogy for companies. As a government, it's fundamentally easier to reach out to your citizens because you're a singular entity trying to get across a message to a bunch of people. Not to say that there aren't challenges with that, but it's easier than individuals communicating with government because there are millions of people that you need to listen to. You have to take these different conflicting demands and interests and weigh them, and it's generally difficult to be able to understand all the data coming off of your citizens and their opinions and their feedback. And as I mentioned, there's a similar analogy for companies, right? It's easy for, say, Apple or IBM or Microsoft to say, all right, this is a new product we're announcing. But it's a lot more difficult for them to actually go out there to their consumers and figure out exactly what it is that they're saying. And of course, we've seen all sorts of technology like social media democratize that further. But I wanted to see if machine learning technology can enable more fine-grained and personalized interaction at scale, right? So I'm saying, for my premise was that for governments, yes, it is possible. Gave a couple of examples. What do you think a similar analogy could be for business? Do you think AI and machine learning can help us here, or some other technologies?
Well, listen, I mean, at the core of its history in Nielsen, it's a research company, and people use research to listen to the market and listen to the audience. In my view, in media, audience is everything. And the audience is comprised of billions of individuals. So I do absolutely believe that AI allows you to listen and observe what everybody's watching, what they're engaging with, what they like and what they don't like, what they repeat, what they don't repeat. And that then feeds recommendation engines, that then feeds ad targeting, that then feeds creative development. So I totally believe in our field, we're seeing it already. And because we're able to sort of increase the granularity and insight from research. What's important are the humans need to know how to interpret it. So, a lot of what we do is with media analytics to make sure that we actually help folks interpret that. And I think AI is going to continue to find new ways and faster ways to better interpret, so that you can, I think, not what you were describing is a company or government broadcasting out. I think what's actually going to be far more important is that every entity have two ears and one mouth and use them in that proportion, which means we have to be listening to the market twice as much as we're talking to the market. And that's how you really serve people.
Absolutely. And again, as you mentioned, it's machine learning and AI that will actually help us to scale to those two ears versus the fraction of an ear that we had before. You're right. Companies like Nielsen, at their heart, I mean, at the heart of Nielsen is that research, is being able to listen to the consumer, is being able to listen to the market and the audience, and being able to do so at a larger scale with more diversity and more fine-grained interaction is what machine learning can enable you to do. So now I want to pivot a little bit, and I want to stop talking about the sort of nitty gritty of the technology itself, and rather I want to talk a little bit about more generally. I mean, actually, first let's start off with diversity, right? So you mentioned that diversity is sort of a catalyst that enables us to adapt to change more quickly. Could we maybe talk a little bit more about what the inherent advantages are to an organization that has a more diverse workforce? You mentioned, first of all, you're getting more cognitive diversity, right? We're hearing more opinions from more people from more backgrounds, and therefore we're not as stuck in our ways because we just have echo chambers of the same opinions, right? That's one of them. What are some of the other advantages, not only from a perspective of we're giving equal opportunity for everybody, because that's like the instant, obvious answer, but even from a business perspective, what competitive advantage does a more diverse organization give you?
Well, there are several levels of that. First of all, I do think, as a CEO, my job is to allocate resources, and get the most return on every resource. Well, our most important resource are our human resources. Um, Anybody who's not working at their full potential, we're leaving value on the table. And people don't work at their full potential because they don't feel heard, they don't feel included, they don't feel understood, they don't feel like they belong. We need to get rid of that because, we've hired this person, we're paying them, we're developing them. We, I have a real responsibility to get the highest return on every individual, and having an inclusive, equitable culture helps make that happen. So that's one. It just makes us more productive. I think secondly, it makes us more effective in terms of our decisions, because with more voices at the table, we're listening to the whole audience. And I think that's important. I think when we're building AI models, making sure that they accommodate different cultures, different languages, different racial histories, different traditions, all helps make sure that we're better understanding what people are doing and why they're doing it and what they're buying, and where they're spending their time and money. So, you can't get to that if you've got, a homogeneous group of people looking at the data one way and training the models in one way. So I think it's even more important in this era where machine learning is part of the mix, that you actually have those models trained by a more robust group of folks. So I think that's a second reason. I think thirdly is, businesses have to be more responsible to society. I think that in this world of social media, there are no secrets. The values in your company become very known externally immediately. And I think if you want to, if you want to serve in our world, a total audience, or you want to serve a total market, you need to understand that market, and your company needs to represent your customers. Your governments need to represent your
Hmm.
citizens. So, I think that it just helps you better relate to the outside world, and it helps you again build better products for that world that you understand them more viscerally because of making room for everybody at the table in the company.
Absolutely. I feel like we always say, it's better, like the examples that you gave, these are examples that when you look at them at surface level, they make sense. But I feel like they're even more impactful when you actually take a look at examples, even if they're not immediately related. And so I remember there's this one thing that I learned a couple of years ago, and I just googled it. So there's this illusion called the Mueller Lie Illusion, most likely pronouncing that wrong, but it's the illusion where you've got the two arrows, right? One with the arrows, or two lines, one with arrows pointing out, one with arrows pointing in. One of the lines looks longer than the other to the vast majority of people, but when researchers asked foragers from the Kalahari Desert to determine which one is longer, 99% of the time they knew that the lines were the same length. This is something that isn't a conscious decision we're making. This is something that's being processed by your brain's visual cortex. And it just goes to show that people from different backgrounds can literally have different ways of viewing the data in front of them, viewing the world around them. And so it does make sense, fundamentally, to have a more diverse organization if you want to retain a competitive advantage into the future. And you're right, with social media, so much more is transparent. Company can't keep their internal, working
Yep.
environment a secret anymore. And so it's important to make sure that everybody's heard, everybody's included in the decisions that a company makes. And so we talked about the importance of this equal opportunity, and as you mentioned, a company, their most valuable resource are the humans actually at the company doing the work, because that's what a company is. It's a collection of humans coming together to do something great. And so I wanted to ask you about the responsibility that you believe that companies have to give back to the community in the sense of enabling more people to learn about the world of technology, right? We've seen initiatives like STEM and STEAM and kids who code and these sorts of things that are enabling more of the youth to get into the world of technology. And I want to get your thoughts on, first of all, why is it important generally for kids to get into the world of tech? What does that mean? What does that entail for them? And also, why should really any company that does anything with tech, which is essentially every organization, be working towards sort of chipping in to get more people into the world of tech?
Well, listen, I think if I go back to what we were saying before about the speed of learning, and keeping up with technical change, it's for all people to continue to have job opportunities and therefore economic opportunities and be able to subscribe to media and buy products, for our end customers, you know, they need those skills to stay relevant. So I think just to fuel the economy, it's important, let alone to be fair and make sure people don't get left behind.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's important. And quite honestly, I think these technologies add more value the more people are using them, and engaging with them. So I think for all those reasons of building skills, building economic opportunity, fueling the economy, actually getting more people to be able to buy your products, it's important that you be able to provide those opportunities to as many people as possible. So yeah, I think there's a moral imperative for companies to be responsible to society, but I also just think there's a practical capital, um, market creation reason to do it as well. So I totally believe you can do good and do well at the same time.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like you are right that there is, of course, that responsibility that companies have. But I mean, whether or not this is a good thing, that's an entirely different debate. But at the end of the day, a lot of the companies are like, all right, if we do this, what's in it for us, right? And something that is both morally good but also at the same time has an advantage for businesses is incredible, and introducing people into the world of technology is one of those things. It's increasing the pool of candidates from which you can choose people to work on your technology, enabling, for example, your company to be more diverse, right, in the future. And
But I would also add that companies compete for talent,
yes.
and I believe the best and brightest want to be in generous cultures. So so generosity to me is pretty core here. So if you've got a company with a generous spirit that's being generous to its employees and generous to society, that generosity tends to pay back in better results. And employees feel like they're in a company with a purpose. They're in a company where they can learn. I think generosity is quite magnetic. So, I think all of us actually have to compete for talent on the basis of purpose and generosity as well.
Wow, that is so incredible to think about, right? There's all these different reasons why it's so important for companies to take that responsibility, right? I mean, as you mentioned, also increasing that pool of candidates, but even just the fact that when you're a more generous organization, people want to work for you. People feel like they have a purpose working at something that works on initiatives that they feel are important. So yeah, you're absolutely right. That is something that lots of businesses should keep in mind when they plan these sorts of initiatives. And you also mentioned just the fact that you should be technologically literate to have equal opportunity in the future. I've always said, if you're going on vacation to like Spain and you're from, let's say I'm from Canada, right? I only know like English, for example, or French, and I'm going to Spain. Obviously, I'm going to learn a little bit of Spanish so I can interact with the locals or order food or do whatever it is that I need to do there. But I'm not going to learn the whole language, but I'm going to learn a little bit. Similarly, no matter what field you're working in the future, right? You could be an artist, right? It doesn't really matter. But if you know a little bit of how to communicate with the technology that you're using to do your work, you will fundamentally be more effective at that work, right? A little while ago, my friend, his manager actually gave him a task, and I talked about this last time, I believe, as well, where he was like, all right, take this little snippet of text, copy it 100 times, and iterate this number from 1 to 100. That was a genuine task the manager gave for him to do manually, and the manager would have done that manually himself if he wasn't able to. And so he just built a little Python script to do it in like a minute. And so that's just a tiny example of something that really adds up to years of wasted time and potential because, well, you didn't know how to communicate with technology. So you're right, there is that responsibility, and I think it's important for humans to take that responsibility. Really quickly, I do want to take some questions from the actual live stream. There are a couple of questions that came in before today's episode. I want to start off with a question from Timothy. He's asking, do businesses that use your product, as in Nielsen's products, the right way and in higher usage correlate to better performance against their competitors that don't?
Yeah, so that's actually empirically proven. So we do know when first of all, when people use us as the currency for media, they've got more trust between the buyers and sellers. They can therefore command better pricing. They're getting more deals done. They're more efficient because they've got a greater demand for buying an audience verified by Nielsen than one where you simply don't know. So I think that's been true on the buy and sell of advertising. I also think those who use our Grace Note product, which is the one to help understand content, see that they have audiences that are more engaged, that are discovering more content, so they stay on those services longer. And ultimately, those who are now using it to actually know what to produce next or what to buy next in terms of content are actually continuing to expand the engagement with their audience. So we see that there, and the advertisers who use us to measure outcomes absolutely are getting more efficiency. They're getting their marketing dollars to pay back because they know what works and what doesn't work. So at scale. So yeah, I mean, that's how we sell our products, is that we sell them on ROI, on the return on investment. And I would say all of those, the buyers and sellers of advertising, the producers of content, advertisers, all see that value in the way they measure their own success. And that's why we keep growing and why people keep telling us what they need us to build next in our product.
Very interesting, right? So it's that two-way communication stream again, right? Not only are you building products and actually having companies buy them, but you're also hearing from them what it is that they need and working towards building out the infrastructure to be able to provide those offerings. We are getting another question from the live stream on YouTube from Akash. He's asking, how can a company gain a competitive edge in the market using technologies like AI or any other technology? What should they look for, and how do you grasp those opportunities?
Listen, I think ultimately you've got to get to where your value is, per the first discussion. I think there's been way too much, sort of AI washing, where, my venture capital friends send me lots of pitches, and people will talk about AI for this and AI for that. But at the end of the day, just because you use AI doesn't make you more valuable.
Yeah.
Just like everybody used one mobile app. So, what matters is, what problem are you solving? How are you giving people products they didn't have before, personalizing in new ways, connecting your products to other products? All of those things, machine learning can do in terms of a function. So I think you got to start with your competitive advantages. Are you, pleasing people? Are you saving them time? Are you saving them money? Or are you delighting them in a different way? So, what is that end benefit to the customer? How are you providing it? If machine learning helps you learn faster to produce that, or helps you deliver that in a different way, that's awesome. But just because you use AI doesn't create a competitive advantage. You actually have to say, what is it in terms of time, money, delight to the consumer of your product that causes them to love it, and then how does AI help you deliver that?
Absolutely. I will say I've as part of like Call for Code, for example, or lots of other hackathons that I've sort of judged for, or seen some of the offerings that have been built out of it. So many offerings quite literally lean their entire sort of pitch on we are using AI technology, and a lot of them don't realize that, as David, as you mentioned, the value of your offering is not the fact that it uses AI, it's what it's able to do. If you can build the world's best language model that doesn't suffer from exposure bias and you don't use any machine learning, it doesn't matter as long as it works, right? That what matters is the experience, not the technology you use to get there. If you take a look at one of Steve Jobs' first keynotes after he came back from Next Step to Apple, and he was talking about how, when Apple created like one of the first certain kinds of printers, I'm forgetting exactly what the details were, they had all this really complex and amazing and innovative technology in it, but they didn't market any of it. They just marketed what it enables you to do, despite all the innovation technologically that was in there. So that's what matters at the end of the day. And if you can use AI in order to provide that sort of competitive advantage, great. But that's not where you want to start. You want to start with the experience. Another question from Akash, and this one's really interesting. How can one keep up with the rapid changes that are happening? I mean, as you mentioned, change is getting faster and faster. So how can one keep up with those changes and adapt to the market? And he wants a special focus on students. And what will this rapid change look like in a decade, in your opinion? How to look for opportunities?
Yeah. So listen, before I was on this call, I was on a different call with our CTO at
Okay.
Nielsen, Srinivata Haran, and his advice was, listen, he's saving personally about 3 hours of commute time a day by not commuting from New Jersey into New York up to our office and
Wow.
back. Take half that time and reinvest in Coursera or Udacity or YouTube videos to constantly learn. And I think students, which are already doing coursework, is one. But I think one of the things that I would encourage, today's college students to do, even high school students, college students, grad students, is bake into your time learning outside the classroom, so that you build a habit of constantly learning. And I would say, right now, this pandemic has shifted the way we spend our time. As you're building your new normal, build a learning hour into every day, because I think time is the constraint. And then fill that time with, these kinds of videos are interesting. I personally have tried to learn around in some of the different languages and what's going on. Um, Everything's out there. There's TED Talks and YouTube videos, and I happen to love the stuff that Sebastian and his team are doing at Udacity, because I think they're particularly good in the machine learning field. So, finding different ways that you're constantly learning makes sense. And you can do two things at once. So, the way I made time is, I'm gonna give myself an hour in the gym every day, and I'm gonna actually learn on learn on a video while on the treadmill at the same time. Anybody can do that.
Mm-hmm.
So, but find time. There's no, the time to me is the most important thing. What you learn is a little bit what you're passionate about. but there's a lot out there. There's a lot, and video is just such a great way to learn.
Absolutely, right? There's so many.
Don't rely just on the classroom. I think universities are also going to have to change the way they teach. We always talk about lifelong learning. It really is important for this generation. There is no way you can learn what you need to know in college. 4 years from now, it'll be different.
Absolutely.
So what you really need to learn is how to constantly learn.
Yeah, you're right. You're right in the sense that, like at universities and colleges now, they cannot fundamentally teach you a certain skill that you're going to keep for the rest of your career, right? What they're going to do is they're going to be like, all right, learn this. And what you're actually going to do is you're going to end up learning how to learn, right? Maybe you'll specialize in learning how to learn about technology. But at the end of the day, you're learning that sort of meta skill. And, as you mentioned, 4 years from now, things are going to be completely different. Things will have completely shifted. We might have entirely different computing architectures, might have different ways of doing AI, right? Learning that today, you've got to be able to adapt in the future. And there's so many resources out there. You mentioned Udacity, Coursera. There's Cognitive Class. There's all sorts of places. TechLifeSkills, where you can learn about all sorts of different fields and all sorts of different technologies. So, thank you, David.
But I would say the other thing that companies should do is one of the things we did. We built a platform called The Greed, where I share things that I found that were particularly interesting. Other leaders do so. You begin to build, I think, sort of a social network of folks that are sharing learning experiences with each other. Companies can do that. Universities can do that. You can do that with professional organizations. I do think curating lists, curating courses is also really valuable. And certainly a lot of our investment in learning and development at Nielsen has shifted to directing people to third parties as opposed to everything being, inside the company, training people on product knowledge. We're opening it up.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting to hear because, I mean, in a way, what's happening is through these new resources, because having to learn has become something that we have to do so often and can't just be done like once in college or university, we're also democratizing access to learning all these different complex topics and subjects to a lot more people, I believe. And just like how cloud computing enables us to democratize compute power so everybody has equal opportunity to build an AI model if they want to, similarly, resources like, as you mentioned, Coursera, Udacity, you name it, Cognitive Class, are enabling more people to learn skills if they have the drive or the passion to do so. If you're passionate about AI, you no longer need to go to university and learn about all the, go through that whole process. You can spin up Cognitive Class, and as long as you're passionate, you have the resources to be able to go and learn. So that democratization, I think, is definitely really important. There's another question from Timothy here. He's asking, if we think about the applications that customers interact with a business's products and services through as an engine, the data is the fuel that powers that engine. Okay, it's not going to perform well without good, clean data that allows them to achieve true to one personalization capabilities. Is there a key area where you see businesses expanding their offerings as a result of orchestrating their data properly?
Well, there's a zillion places I see that. So first of all, I agree with it. Having good data makes sense. I would say where I see real value, and I know the media industry better than most. I think that one-to-one personalization, what's happening well is not, people thinking I have all the data, I know what you want to watch next. That's not working. What's working is actually creating the interface for real-time suggestions and recommendations. And if you see that on a streaming service, a Disney Plus or an Amazon Prime or a Netflix, you begin to see recommendation engines. But I think every programmer is beginning to do that more effectively and actually create the environment where that data can be improved by real-time interaction with the audience, which makes the next thing even more personalized and specific. I similarly think in advertising, there was this dream of one-to-one advertising. It doesn't work. You can't possibly create enough things on the fly, but I think this ability to sort of do segments and really understand which segments people are in is helping people to have less ads, but the ads they see are more relevant to them. And I think that creates the overall experience. But again, it's if you have personalization on the edge, a lot of it's happening in the smart TV, in the smart tablet, on the smartphone. So being able to use the actual device to interact with the actual audience member, I think is key. And I think in a lot of industries that's the case, is we're going to have more real-time personalization as opposed to sort of big brother personalization.
Yeah, and I feel like that's also going to solve, the whole sort of not solve per se, but it's going to work towards increasing trust in AI, right? If a lot of this compute and a lot of this personalization isn't just happening in the cloud where everybody's data is stored, if it's happening at the edge where your devices are making the decisions of what they want to show you, that sort of increases the trust that you have in those systems, right? We've seen that Apple WebKit has kind of upset some marketers because of how well they're able to detect tracking and give the users the option as to whether or not they want to allow that tracking to happen. And maybe the future is actually personalization at the edge, right? Being able to leverage all that data coming directly from the consumer, but doing that directly on their devices. There is a question now from YouTube from Study. He's asking, can AI be used to make human resources more effective? What are the HR practices where AI is used the most? And what are the prerequisites to start applying AI within human resources in an organization?
So you can use it throughout the human resource life cycle. If I start with employees, back to this issue of training and development, personalized models can predict what additional courses people should take, what else they can learn. I think we're beginning to use it when we've got a job opening. So we've got a new job that opened or someone got promoted. We can look across the whole employee base to see who might be qualified for that, which is far smarter than just the hiring manager knowing the people that she knows, right? So you end up not promoting so much within silos, but creating more career opportunities by saying, listen, you've got a lot of skills over here. You might have been using them in marketing, but they actually could apply to product development. Or we've got this role in data science, and we've got this person over here that was doing communications, but a lot of it was statistical, and maybe they could do this. So I think the machines can better match employees to opportunities and also employees to what they need to learn next to be ready for more opportunities. So I want to use it to create more career advancement. The biggest thing I want to do is make sure we've got diversity at every level. And that means we need to be developing all people for more opportunities. And AI is going to help us match people, opportunities, and skill development. If I back out of that, I would say the second thing is we're using AI to predict people who might be vulnerable, who are more likely to attrite, more likely to be recruited by another company. And you know that certain people, they've been in a job so long, they haven't seen career advancement, their level of engagement in the company, if things are waning, you can intervene. Mm-hmm. So I think better understanding to retain people is important. And then thirdly, I do think it helps on recruiting. So I think it helps on knowing, where to target, who's going to be good at jobs. Honestly, when you get huge volumes of resumes for a specific role, being able to sieve through those by machine to actually prioritize where you really want to go deeper and who you really want to spend time with, it helps. So I think the sort of whole recruiting applicant tracking systems are also being improved by basic machine learning as well.
Wonderful. Now, really quickly, I do actually want to expand upon what you just said. I can't remember the name of the actual event right now. I'm trying to figure it out, but there was an event that I was at in Amsterdam, and at that event, we were talking about. Give me one moment. Let's see over here. That was at the Dutch Transformation Forum. That's what it was. All right. So at the Dutch Transformation Forum in Amsterdam, there was a key point that I was talking about, and that is that, for example, why do so many people love Spotify? Versus Apple Music, even though Apple has this amazing ecosystem that sort of sucks you into every one of their products, why is Spotify that one outlier that so many people are willing to go out of their way to use? It's because they have so much data, and because of that data, such good recommendation algorithms and techniques that they can literally say, all right, play some music and we won't stop, right? We'll just keep going with similar music, and you won't need to click a thing in the interface. And it's almost magical. Until, of course, recently when Apple started to use all sorts of data from iTunes and Apple Music, and also has competitive algorithms. But up until a year ago, that was mostly the case. And an issue that sort of came up, and something that I addressed in my keynote, was that with the amount of data that Spotify's collecting, they almost have an unfair advantage versus the competitors that maybe want to start, maybe startups, for example, that have barely been in the industry for a couple of weeks, that now want to be able to compete with Spotify that don't have that data to be able to provide an offering like that. How do you think we can work towards solving that problem, in the sense of providing more equal opportunity to different organizations, different companies, even if they don't have access to the same vast amount of data that other companies might?
Well, listen, I mean, I think companies like Spotify are also competing on the basis of data, and continue to work that way. And it's part of why we see walled gardens in digital media. Part of how I'm trying to solve it in my industry is by creating tools that are shared by all, that are common. And it kind of comes back to sort of this notion of currency. So at the core, I've been focused on two ID platforms. One is an audience ID, so that you can actually know this person, saw this many shows, this many times, this many places. ID matters, because the way advertising was working was using cookies as ID. That's going away. So I'm a big believer in creating a universal ID. All of our companies, because we've got most of the media industry, want an ID that works for media. And we're making that happen, which can be the basis of their measurement, the basis of their analytics. And by doing it collectively and sharing it back to everybody, it creates this sort of universal ground truth. I think multiple industries are going to find players that do that. So, we're doing it in the media industry. Verisk is doing it in the insurance industry. Gartner is doing it in the tech industry. Having, these backbone data sources, I think, is important. And one of the things I've got to be really clear on with Nielsen is we're independent. We're not tied, and we can't have a business model tied to any success of a buyer or seller. It's got to be open to make it work. And I think these sort of digital currencies are going to be, and which really become leveling the playing field on sort of core universal data, are going to happen, because I think that's, everybody's going to need it. And a universal view of the total audience is something that no individual company could have. So you kind of re-level the playing field that way. But somebody's got to do it, and somebody's got to make it happen. In the music industry, we're making it happen in the video part of the industry first. But we have to play our role in media. Other people have to play roles in other industries.
Very interesting. So it's nice to see that Nielsen's working towards that, because that's definitely a challenge, right? If you're a startup and you want to start a Spotify competitor, right? Immediately you already lack one thing that Spotify is already exceptional at, which is one of the only reasons that people might choose to use their service versus something like Apple Music, if they're already in that ecosystem. So being able to work towards solving that problem for more equal opportunity, for more competition, to nurture innovation, is definitely really important. Another question that I have from the live stream here, this one's from Tina. She's asking, how can businesses actually use the data coming from their consumers to make better decisions and provide more relevant offerings?
I think that's really important, to sort of, and I think you have to do it at multiple levels. I think, first of all, you got to look at the data in aggregate to identify the biggest opportunities for new products. I think that the pace of product innovation is important to staying relevant. So what's the next problem you're going to solve? What's the next feature you're going to provide? What's the next way you're going to delight that customer? The data will help point you in the right direction as to where the biggest number of customers need something. So it helps with the product creation and product development process at the macro level. At the more individual level, I think finding where do people buy that product, what's the right distribution channel, where do people need to see a product in a physical place, Where can it be done by e-commerce? Where do people want to buy products and where do people want to rent products? I think is going to be important. And more things are rented today. And so people are owning less and renting more. So I think it helps you kind of understand that business model. And then when you launch it, you can actually test what the response is and double down on the things that are working and quickly cut off the things that are not working. So it speeds up your product development and distribution strategies quite a bit.
Absolutely. We have all this data, and businesses are not just businesses, their consumers are generating so much data we don't even realize it. And when we actually start to use technology, and we've already talked about machine learning, AI, to start to leverage that data, start to understand that data in ways that it's not that we couldn't, in ways that we couldn't scale before, I think that's absolutely incredible. And I wanted to sort of circle back around not only this question, but also the question before this one, where I was talking about that equal opportunity around data. You said that you're, an advocate for, this sort of universal ID and these sorts of things. Market is, for example, we've tried cookies, we've tried browser fingerprinting, we've tried all sorts of things, and all these things. Both sides of the competition have sort of been inventing new techniques and then inventing new techniques to defeat those techniques. And it's been sort of a cat and mouse game here. So do you think that other technologies, maybe something like blockchain, could help us here? If so, how?
Well, blockchain is a really efficient way to transact and to, exchange data in a safe way and be able to track where it is and where it isn't. So, I think it can help, but I think it's a means to an end. I think the real issue is I'm so glad by some of the questions here. People have to really define what their value proposition is, how the data they have is making that value proposition better, how that data coupled with sort of universal backbone data like ID or media currency, whatever it is, help improve it. Then you can say, does blockchain make it all more efficient? Blockchain in and of itself, it doesn't improve the data. It can make it move more smoothly between players.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I was sort of asking that as a sort of tie-in to a different episode that we had around the world of blockchain with Andy Martin and Tim Duncan. So Andy is the worldwide blockchain value design leader at IBM, and Timothy Duncan's a product growth expert at Bottle Rocket. So sort of tying into that, and one more thing that I want to say is that people are asking a couple questions about two things: blockchain and also misconceptions around AI. If you'd like to learn more about the world of blockchain, again, there will be a link in the description to the episode that I did with Andy and Tim, where we went into a lot of detail, as well as for misconceptions of AI. There will be two links in the description: one to the episode with Sri Raman Ruchir from IBM Research, and also another one with Rob High and Sam Lightstone from IBM. And so I will go ahead and put those down in the description as well.
Those are all my old friends.
Oh yeah, wonderful. That's
Lots
nice.
of those guys.
Yeah, that's good to hear. All right, so let's see. There is another question. This one's from Peter on the live stream. How do you think that the analysis of data can help solve social and economic problems even before those problems fully surface? Are there any examples that you have from the past?
Well, one thing we're working on right now is, media is also pop culture. It affects what people say. So we're actually looking at an inclusion index about how diverse is the cast of every show, and of every movie. How diverse are the writers and producers behind that movie? How diverse of an audience do they have? And that helps say, is the culture actually contributing to people's impressions? And then back to these recommendation engines, how much are people being recommended a more diverse set of content to watch? Because part of the problem with these engines, if they just feed you more of what you like, you can live in your own bubble. Mm-hmm. You can live in your own news cycle. You can live in your own culture cycle where you don't see the rest of the world. So I think, tracking all of that helps the producers of content, the distributors of content, the people who present the news, the people who collect the news, make sure that you're covering the full story for the full audience. And I think these measurement techniques will really help make that happen. And hopefully that will head off some of the divisiveness we feel because people don't have a full appreciation for other people. They know people like them. They live in their own bubbles. They live in their own ecosystem. And quite honestly, the world is too divided right now. It's too fragmented. I think this helps, and that's created a lot of strife and unfairness and injustice and economic hardship. It's impacted the ability of some countries to react to coronavirus.
Yeah.
So, I think our getting behind all of that and helping to make sure that we have a inclusive media ecosystem is something we're working on. I think the same would be true in a lot of industries.
Very nice. Actually, a nice coincidence. Right as you mentioned how, for example, recommendations might put people in their own little echo chambers on, for example, social media, their own little news cycles where they're like, oh, my opinions are correct because everything else I'm hearing is, completely concurs with my opinion. And right as you said, we got a question on LinkedIn, and this is from Alejandra. She's asking, how do you make sure that AI doesn't limit consumers since it may not allow for flexibility for a sudden change of mind, like with AI tailored marketing based on past likes?
Listen, Alejandro, that's a real risk. That you want to make sure that you've got models that are deductive and not just inductive, and they're and ultimately they're getting to abductive reasoning, which means they're looking for opportunities that you haven't seen already. Because there is a risk that you just keep feeding people the same content and the same product and the same music, and that they don't discover new things. This is part of why I think I'm so committed in our company to making sure we look at the total audience. And when I say audience is everything, it's making sure that what other people are watching, so you can find things that people might be interested in, and you kind of gradually help them expand their universe. And I think that's so important that you do have models that are looking at expanding people's opportunity as opposed to just feeding them the next thing based on what they liked in the past. Same thing with food, right? I mean, people would eat 4 meals if they just kept eating the thing they liked. We need serendipity. We need trial. We need to suggest things that you might like based on other people like you, or just based on what's going on in the world. So I do think it's really important that those models use multiple reasoning types so that we're creating serendipity and new opportunities.
Absolutely. And I feel like maybe a good example, both Apple Music and Spotify actually have these special playlists that they put together where it's music that was released recently that actually is a different genre or different style than you usually listen to, but based off of things that other people like, they think that you would like this too, right? To sort of help you expand your horizons as to what it is that you might like. I know that there are some examples of where companies
But I use that example. This went back to inclusion. You have to be a certain economic level to afford an Apple product,
Oh, yeah,
right?
totally.
And not everybody is a Spotify subscriber. So I think making sure that you're looking at the total audience and bringing that in as well, because otherwise you really can have a very affluent world of recommendation engines and a mass world. And I certainly want to change that so that everybody's got some access to new content. So making sure that we're really looking at the total world, I think is important. Any individual company only has its own data. I think there is an obligation to have sort of metadata that's across all sources.
That actually, that brings up a really interesting point that I want to delve into a little bit more really quickly. And that is that So we've already covered a little bit, for example, how Nielsen's enabling all these different companies to sort of, come together and enable this sort of competition. But how do you think AI technology in specific can be made more accessible to people? And how do you think that people, like, for example, that, as you mentioned, can't afford an Apple product or aren't necessarily Spotify subscribers, how can they also leverage this AI technology? What are some initiatives that enable machine learning technology, at least the inference of it and the offering itself, to be democratized?
Well, listen, I think that so much of the basic frameworks are now out there. They're available, and you're using a lot yourself. So I think part of it is there's a lot more out there than people know. It's not all expensive and unaccessible. I do think data sources are important. So we are finding some sort of universal data sources that people can use as a beginning of a ground truth to be able to come up with new suggestions. I think consortiums will play a role. So in some industries, companies are sharing. I've been really encouraged by sort of the general sharing in the pharmaceutical industry around vaccines right now
Mm-hmm.
to speed up, because we clearly need to speed up vaccine development here. And that's all happening because there are new models of the way data shares. But silos fundamentally need to be broken down. And both companies and industries need to find, real ways to do that while protecting IP. I think I don't want people to just give away all their assets. But I think this sort of collective open source technologies certainly help as well, are all helping to level the playing field. And the cloud, as made it also, you can rent the computing power and rent the algorithm,
Mm-hmm.
which I think just is a lot lower investment than buying computing power or owning algorithms. So, you know, rent is a great way for people to try before they buy.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, machine learning technology is becoming a lot more accessible and definitely a lot more democratized in that sense. Now, there is one
Data
more.
too.
Sorry?
Data is also becoming democratized. So,
Yes, that's really interesting. And we're seeing, the advent of a couple different technologies. One of them is the Google Dataset Searcher, which was launched a couple months ago, and it's actually really helpful because there's all these different sources of data online that a lot of people don't even realize for their own sort of development of machine learning models, and that enables you to help find them. Or, for example, Kaggle, where lots of people can come together, upload the different kinds of data that they have, create competitions, sponsor competitions. It's pretty incredible. And another thing is, within machine learning, especially, sharing really, really is caring. Because if you take a look at a lot of the innovations within the past couple of weeks, even within AI, a lot of them are driven fundamentally by the fact that within the AI community we have this sort of openness that's sort of driven by researchers. It even comes back to your point around people, talent, wanting to join companies that have purpose that they agree with, right? Apple, for example, up until a couple, I would say 2 years ago, didn't really have much AI talent because they felt like researchers felt like Apple was really closed in and didn't really share any of the research they did. So any of the research they did would just go in an Apple product. No one would ever hear about it. But then when Apple started the Apple Machine Learning Journal and they started to publish a little bit of the work they do, suddenly they've got some of the best AI talent in the world, right? So people want to join the companies that they believe has similar purpose and vision to what they believe in, and generous companies. People agree with that. People want to be associated with that. And like, imagine if Google had never open sourced BERT, right? They would just use that as a competitive advantage for the Google search engine. We would not have nearly any of the language modeling technology in the industry as we would today, as we do today, right? So it's
and
really
Google
incredible.
got a lot of benefit from that.
Oh,
It not
absolutely.
for Google to open it up.
Absolutely, right? You're taking a look at like OpenAI, you're taking a look at competitors like Apple and Microsoft. Everybody's using technology that originated at the Google Research Center. That definitely has some things to say about the research that Google does. So it's pretty incredible. Now, one more question I do want to ask you, and this one's about data again. So data and insights are particularly important when designing engagement campaigns with segmented audiences or figuring out what new feature to develop next. How are you seeing data being used to inform the strategy and planning aspect of technology?
They decide what technology to build next.
Yeah, I believe that's
Okay.
what we're talking about.
Um, well, listen, I think that of all the software world or info services like we're in it, you know, data tells you, how people are using your product today, where they have to stop and connect it to something else. So that how do you make it easier to just keep expanding and bringing your data into decisions? So, for us, workflow has been a real design point, and we've been building a lot more data to understand how people use our data to buy and sell media, to buy and sell advertising, to do content creation, to determine outcomes, to build their marketing campaigns. And then we just keep building technology that goes further and further into the ecosystem, both things we build and making it easier for our data and algorithms to be used with other people's. And so, that's how we use it. And I see our customers doing the same. People looking around the edges of what are they solving today and what else do they need to solve on behalf of their end customers. And I think that, that's driving product priorities. That's also driving, I think, sales and customer interactions to make sure you really are more solutions oriented in what you're providing. You're not selling a product as much as you're solving a problem.
Absolutely, right. I've always said that why is it important for people to get into the world of technology? It's because developers and generally people who build technology at the end of the day, they're not just building tech, they're solving the world's problems with tech, right? And being able to sort of understand what those problems are using the power of data and even using the power of other technologies like machine learning and AI, using machine learning to understand what the problems are that you're getting from the data coming from your consumers, and then from there being able to use potentially tools like machine learning or AI, really any tool in a programmer's toolbox to solve those problems. That's where the real value in technology lies.
Well, but I think the other thing is being able to help solve more problems. So, I think the whole creation of web services and APIs have made an enormous difference because once you've solved something, you can then lend it to others so
Mm-hmm.
they don't have to solve that problem anymore. They can put it into their solution.
Absolutely.
And I think the whole continued movement towards composable software is going to speed things up a lot. And I think companies that don't make it easy to interact on APIs in the tech space are going to get cut out because the real value here is your little solution can be part of somebody else's bigger solution, can be part of the solution after that, but you've got to connect it through in very seamless API technology.
Mm-hmm. You're right. And I mean, I feel like a good example of that would be AI, right? Again, we can circle back to this. Not everybody who's integrating AI in their app for visual recognition needs to build an entire ResNet from scratch in TensorFlow and train it on their own infrastructure, right? You could just as easily just go to Watson, feed it your images, tell it to recognize these classes, figure out where something is in an image, download your model, slap it into Xcode with CoreML. And that's it, right? You don't need
Totally.
to worry about the nitty gritty. Whereas before, without these sorts of, as you mentioned, composable technologies, you'd have to build all of the infrastructure for that from scratch. So you're right. This sort of technology is enabling, all. I gave the example of machine learning, but every technology to be more accessible to people so that they can use it to solve the world's problems. And once they've solved it, provide it to others so they don't need to solve the problem again. Wonderful point that you mentioned there. And so, with that, again, if you do have any more questions that we weren't able to get to on the live stream today, do feel free to put them in the comments. We will definitely try and get back to you. And so, feel free to put those in the comments as well. Just going to make sure we don't have any on LinkedIn. All right, wonderful. Really quickly, I do think, okay, we do have a question that I want to ask you really quickly from Facebook. This is a
Okay.
question from Suman. He's asking, how is working from home going to affect IT employees from a social and health perspective?
It's a good question. There are certainly benefits. People have more time. They can be a little more flexible in the way they work. As I said, I think culturally, it pushes decisions to the edge and levels them out. So there's a lot I like about working from home. When it's safe, I do think that it'll be a mix coming together, also builds trust, helps IT professionals better understand their end users and the other folks using their products, and helps them solve tougher problems by collaborating. And I think we've got to do a lot to allow online collaboration in addition to bring people in. I am concerned about mental health. I think, there are certainly things that are going on with anxiety and depression and loneliness. And I think that, companies and individuals both need to take more accountability for their mental health, and invest in each other, because it is a change in the way we work. Humans are basically social animals. This is one way to socialize. I'm glad to be with all of you, but I think for the IT professional, we've got to find a hybrid model. I do not think it can be 100% work from home, because of some of the health issues, and social and loneliness. It's just, and quite honestly, productivity. You learn from each other. So we're really trying to design, is it 1 week a month that people are together and 3 weeks that they're not, so that we get the best of both worlds. And it is possible to do that with technology.
Wonderful.
Thank
Again,
you.
technology is the catalyst. Thank you very much, David, for coming on the show today. I really appreciate the time you took out to share your insights. Really quickly, as you know, we've got a really diverse audience. Is there a closing message you'd like to share with them today?
Listen, I think, all of this discussion has been about, you are in charge of you. You matter. You matter to the world. You matter to yourself. So decide what you want to do. Invest in your own learning. Invest in your own path forward. I think companies need to create that environment, but ultimately, I think, people have more opportunity than ever to chart their own path. Take advantage of it, and keep learning.
That's a very insightful message. Thank you very much, David. Once again, honor to have you on the show. Thank you for being a part. Thank you very much, viewers, for listening. Remember, these streams are held on every Sunday in the morning Eastern time, so make sure you join us this coming Sunday at 11 a.m. EST. Once again, thank you very much, everybody, and goodbye.
Bye-bye.